Imagine moving thousands of miles away from home, chasing the dream of a better life, only to find yourself entangled in a web of lies, betrayal, and a love affair that would one day lead to death. This is not just another story of lust and greed. It's the chilling tale of how an innocent-looking Indian student's pursuit of opportunity collided with the secret world of a wealthy Canadian millionaire, a world where power, money, and desperation created a deadly trap. If you're new here, welcome to the Twisted Minds, a channel where we peel back the darkest layers of human behavior. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, so you never miss the shocking stories we uncover. It all began with Arav, a 23-year-old from Mumbai, whose parents had invested every rupee they had into his education abroad. For them, Canada was not just a destination, it was a ticket to a better life. Arav was smart, ambitious, and charming, but behind the sparkle in his eyes was the weight of expectation. He knew failing was not an option, but when he landed in Toronto, reality hit him harder than he ever expected. Rent was sky high, tuition drained him dry, and part-time jobs barely paid enough to survive. Every day was a struggle, and the dream his family had sacrificed began to feel like a nightmare. That was when he met her, Melissa Carter. She was everything Arav wasn't: powerful, established, and rich beyond imagination. At 42, Melissa was the wife of a Canadian business tycoon known for real estate ventures across Ontario. But Melissa herself wasn't just a trophy wife. She was a millionaire in her own right, running a luxury interior design firm with clients from Hollywood to Dubai. Arav first crossed her path at a lavish gala, where he was working as a server to earn some extra cash. He remembered the moment vividly: Melissa, in a red silk gown, laughing too loudly at jokes she didn't find funny, her diamond necklace catching the light. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, Arav felt seen, not as a struggling student, not as an immigrant, but as a man. Melissa was drawn to him instantly. He was young, exotic, and carried an innocence she had long lost in her own marriage. For Arav, Melissa represented escape. She was sophistication, luxury, and a promise that maybe, just maybe, he could belong in this world of wealth and influence. What started as stolen glances soon spiraled into secret conversations, and within weeks, they were meeting behind closed doors. It wasn't just passion that fueled their affair. It was the unspoken truth that both were using each other. Melissa craved youth and excitement. Arav craved stability, money, and most importantly, a visa. But Melissa was no ordinary woman. She had secrets buried under her designer heels, secrets that even her millionaire husband had no clue about. The affair quickly turned into an arrangement. Melissa offered Arav financial support and the promise of helping him secure permanent residency in Canada. In return, Arav gave her his devotion, his loyalty, and his silence. On the surface, it seemed like a dream come true for Arav, but beneath the glittering illusion was a dangerous reality. Melissa's promises came with strings, and those strings would soon tighten into a noose. Friends noticed the change in Arav. Once humble and focused, he now flaunted expensive watches, designer jackets, and drove cars he clearly couldn't afford on a student's income. He brushed off questions, telling classmates he had landed side gigs in business consulting. But the truth was far more twisted. Melissa had begun to pull him into her world of manipulation, using not only her wealth, but also her influence in immigration networks. She whispered to him about loopholes, about shortcuts that could get him permanent residency without the endless paperwork and waiting periods. Arav, desperate to please his family and terrified of being sent back to India as a failure, listened more than he questioned. But behind Melissa's charm was something darker. She wasn't just bending the rules. She was orchestrating a scam that had already trapped several unsuspecting international students before Arav. He didn't know it yet, but he was walking into a deadly trap where love and legality were only masks for greed and deception. And as their affair deepened, so did the stakes. Melissa became possessive, demanding, and increasingly paranoid that someone would discover their secret. Arav, torn between gratitude and fear, felt himself sinking into a quicksand he couldn't escape. Little did he know, the story he thought he was controlling was about to consume him entirely. Because in the world of the twisted minds, love can become a weapon, money can become a leash, and trust can be fatal. Stay with us as we unravel how this forbidden affair spiraled into a visa scam, so sinister it would leave one person dead and the other fighting for their life. But before we dive deeper, make sure to like this video and subscribe to The Twisted Minds. Your support helps us bring more stories of betrayal, obsession, and crime that the world needs to hear. At first, Arav believed Melissa's promises were just sweet nothings, whispered in the heat of their stolen nights. But soon, her words became action. She began introducing him to people who spoke with authority, immigration consultants, lawyers who weren't quite lawyers, and men in expensive suits who never gave their real names. These encounters happened in dimly lit restaurants or behind the closed doors of Melissa's lavish office, where crystal chandeliers cast eerie shadows over conversations that were anything but legitimate. Arav was told he could secure his permanent residency within months, bypassing years of waiting, if only he trusted Melissa's circle. He tried to ignore the red flags, telling himself that rich people played by different rules, that maybe this was just how things worked at the top. But deep down, a gnawing unease began to grow. Still, the thought of returning to India empty-handed haunted him, and Melissa's intoxicating presence dulled his doubts. Melissa's obsession with Arav intensified. She showered him with gifts, whisked him away to luxury resorts, and made sure he tasted a life of extravagance that was impossible to walk away from. But with every gift came a reminder. She was the reason for his survival in Canada. She would slip into his ear after a glass of wine, her voice low and controlling, reminding him that no one else could give him what she could. Arav, young and inexperienced, mistook her manipulation for devotion. He convinced himself that she truly cared for him, that her possessiveness was love, even though every day he felt the walls closing in. Melissa's husband, Richard Carter, remained blissfully unaware, or at least, that's what Arav thought. Richard was a man accustomed to appearances, more married to his empire than his wife, but even the sharpest businessman could be blinded by comfort. Still, whispers began to circulate in Toronto's high society about Melissa's late night absences, her questionable business dealings, and the mysterious young man often seen leaving her office at odd hours. Arav didn't realize it then, but the eyes of people far more powerful than Melissa were beginning to turn toward him. It was around this time that Melissa introduced Arav to the first step of the scam. She explained it as though it were nothing unusual. Students like him would pay large sums of money, sometimes their entire family savings, for fraudulent job offers or fake business sponsorships. With her connections, these documents would appear legitimate enough to fool immigration officers. In exchange, Melissa and her associates pocketed huge profits. "You're not just my lover," she told Arav one night, running her fingers through his hair. "You're my partner." She painted it as an opportunity, a way for him to rise quickly, to join her in the world of power and wealth. Arav hesitated, but the temptation was overwhelming. Not only would he secure his own visa, but Melissa promised him a cut of the money if he helped recruit other students. And so, slowly, Arav crossed the line. He reached out to fellow classmates, those just as desperate as he once was, convincing them that Melissa had the solution to their problems. At first, it was small, just 1 or 2 students who handed over money. The scheme worked. They received documents that looked authentic, enough to keep immigration at bay, and Melissa delivered on her promises. Arav felt powerful, even heroic, as if he was saving his friends. But soon, 1 or 2 became 10, then 20, and with each new victim, the scam grew larger, darker, and harder to control. But power is addictive, and it blinded Arav to the dangers lurking ahead. The more he immersed himself in Melissa's world, the more he lost sight of who he had once been. His calls home to India became shorter, his parents unaware that their son, whom they believed was studying hard, was sinking into crime. His conscience was a quiet voice, drowned out by Melissa's promises of wealth and security. She would tell him, "This is survival, Arav. Everyone does it. You're just smarter than the rest." Yet every time he closed his eyes at night, he wondered if survival was worth the risk. The turning point came when one of the students who bought into the scheme realized the documents they had received were fake. Panicked and terrified of deportation, they threatened to go to the authorities. Arav brought the issue to Melissa, expecting her to fix it, but what he saw chilled him to the core. Melissa didn't panic. Instead, she coldly arranged for her associates to visit the student, warning them to keep quiet. That student never came back to campus. Rumors spread of a sudden departure, a family emergency, but Arav knew better. It was the first time he saw Melissa's true face, not just manipulative, not just controlling, but ruthless. In that moment, he realized he wasn't just part of a scam. He was entangled in something that could kill him. And yet, walking away wasn't an option. Melissa had proof of his involvement. Messages, bank transfers, names of students he had recruited. If he tried to escape, she could destroy him in an instant. Worse, the feelings he had for her, twisted and tangled though they were, kept him tethered. He wanted to hate her, but he couldn't resist the pull. He was trapped, and the trap was tightening. Little did Arav know, this was only the beginning of his descent into Melissa's dangerous empire, a descent that would soon cross paths with the FBI, a web of betrayal, and ultimately death. It didn't take long before the cracks in Melissa's empire began to show. The missing student was only the start. Soon, whispers spread among the international community about shady sponsorships and fake job offers, and those whispers found their way to the desks of immigration officers. Files began to pile up, cases with strange similarities, all linked to Melissa's company or her network of consultants. At first, the authorities suspected sloppy paperwork, but as the number of complaints grew, a darker pattern began to emerge. Students were being lured with promises of quick visas, only to end up broke, undocumented, or suddenly vanishing without a trace. The Canadian Border Services Agency opened a quiet inquiry, but what no one knew was that the FBI had already been watching Melissa's associates for suspected links to international money laundering. And in the center of it all was a young Indian student who had no idea that his name was about to appear in an FBI file. Arav sensed the shift before he even knew what was happening. Melissa grew restless, snapping at him more often, drinking more heavily during their nights together. She would lock herself in her office for hours, emerging with red, rimmed eyes and a phone glued to her hand. Her once playful affection had turned into suffocating control, and every time Arav suggested they slow down or step back, she reminded him of the consequences. "You think you can walk away?" she hissed one night, her voice trembling with rage. "I made you. Without me, you're nothing. Don't forget, I hold your future in my hands." For the first time, Arav felt genuine fear, not just of losing Melissa, but of what she was capable of doing to him. The student community was buzzing. Stories of Melissa's scams trickled through WhatsApp groups and late-night dorm conversations. Some believed Arav was in on it. Others pitied him as a boy trapped in the wrong woman's arms. But one thing was certain: the law was catching up. One evening, as Arav left Melissa's condo, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Its tinted windows gave nothing away, but it didn't move for hours. Over the next week, he saw the same car again, outside the university, near his part-time job. Paranoia clawed at him. He wanted to confront Melissa, but when he did, she brushed it off with icy laughter. "You think they scare me? I've dealt with worse. As long as you stay quiet, they can't touch us." Her confidence was terrifying, almost delusional. Arav wondered if she truly believed her own lies, or if she was just playing a game no one else understood. Meanwhile, Melissa's husband Richard was no longer blind. He had caught fragments of whispered phone calls, found receipts for large sums of cash withdrawn under his wife's name, and overheard her snapping at Arav late one night when she thought the house was empty. Richard hired a private investigator, and within weeks, he knew the truth. His wife was having an affair with a student nearly half her age and was funneling money into a fraudulent network that could ruin his entire empire. For Richard, it wasn't love that burned. It was betrayal, humiliation, and the threat to his legacy. But instead of confronting Melissa immediately, he quietly began feeding information to the authorities, eager to distance himself from the scandal that was about to erupt. Arav's nights turned sleepless. Guilt gnawed at him. Every call from his parents in India felt like a dagger. They asked about his studies, about his future, about when he would bring them to Canada to share his success. He lied to them, telling them everything was going well, while knowing deep down that the ground beneath his feet was crumbling. The FBI had begun covert surveillance, monitoring Melissa's accounts, tracking her movements, and collecting testimony from students who had fallen victim. Arav's name surfaced repeatedly, not just as a lover, but as an active participant. The walls were closing in, and yet Melissa clung to him tighter than ever, as if dragging him down with her was the only way she could survive. The breaking point came one night, when Melissa revealed her most dangerous plan yet. Sitting across from Arav, her eyes gleaming with a manic determination, she told him they would expand the scam, using shell companies overseas to launder the millions pouring in. She wanted Arav to help manage it, to be her right hand. When he hesitated, she snapped, slamming her glass against the table. Do you want to go back to India as a nobody? Do you want to rot in poverty while your friends thrive here? I'm giving you everything, Arav. Power, money, status. You don't get to walk away. For the first time, Arav saw her not as a savior, not as a lover, but as a predator, and he realized that the affair that had once seemed like a blessing was now a chain around his neck. But he was already in too deep. The FBI surveillance, the growing list of victims, the watchful eyes of Richard's investigator. Every step Arav took was already being recorded. He thought he had time to decide, to figure out a way out of the mess. But what he didn't know was that Melissa's empire was about to collapse, and when it did, it would drag them both into a storm of betrayal, exposure, and death. The fall of Melissa Carter's empire didn't come quietly. It came crashing down like a glass tower under the weight of its own secrets. The FBI had been building their case for months, working in silence, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By now, they had enough evidence to tie Melissa and her network to dozens of fraudulent visa applications, offshore accounts, and even potential trafficking charges. The Canadian Border Services Agency joined forces, and what had begun as whispers among students turned into an international investigation. Yet inside Melissa's luxurious condo, with its marble floors and panoramic views of Toronto's skyline, she carried on as if nothing could touch her. To Arav, her confidence felt like madness, a refusal to accept the storm that was bearing down on them. But he stayed, partly because he feared her, partly because he loved her in some twisted way, and mostly because he knew that leaving was no longer an option. Richard Carter, meanwhile, was playing his cards with cold precision. The betrayal had cut him deeply, but his pride mattered more than his marriage. Through his private investigator, Richard handed over documents, bank records, and photographs to the FBI, painting a damning picture of his wife's double life. He wanted her destroyed, not just exposed, and he wanted the world to know that he had nothing to do with her crimes. Arav's face appeared in those files too. Grainy photos of him entering Melissa's office, receipts of money wired in his name. Richard made sure the authorities saw Arav not as a victim, but as her accomplice. For Arav, the trap was now sealed. The raid came on a rainy Thursday evening. Arav remembered the sound first, the heavy pounding on the condo door, followed by voices shouting commands. Melissa's glass of wine slipped from her hand, shattering across the floor as agents flooded the apartment, their jackets marked with bold letters that left no doubt who they were. FB, don't move! Arav froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. Melissa, on the other hand, didn't flinch. She raised her hands slowly, her face painted with a cold, defiant smirk. It was as if she had been expecting this moment all along, as if she had rehearsed it. Arav was shoved against the wall, his wrists cuffed, his mind spiraling. In seconds, the life he thought he controlled was ripped away, and the illusion of safety Melissa had built around him shattered into pieces. But Melissa wasn't finished. Even as agents dragged her from the condo, she turned to Arav and hissed, "Don't you dare betray me. If I go down, "You go down with me." Her voice was venom, a final warning that rang in his ears long after she was gone. At the FBI headquarters, Arav was thrown into a stark interrogation room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Across the table sat two agents who knew everything, or at least enough to bury him for life. They showed him bank statements, testimonies from students, even recordings of his phone calls arranging meetings. Arav broke. Tears streamed down his face as he tried to explain, to convince them he was just a pawn in Melissa's game. But the agents only leaned in closer, their eyes sharp, asking him the question that would haunt him forever. Were you her lover or her partner in crime? Melissa's arrest made headlines overnight. Millionaire interior designer caught in international visa scam. The newspapers screamed. Her glamorous photo splashed across every screen. The media devoured the scandal. Her affair with a foreign student, the betrayal of her millionaire husband, the ruined lives of desperate immigrants. Arav's name was kept hidden at first, but within days it leaked. His face, once filled with hope and ambition, was now branded with shame. His parents in India saw their son plastered across TV channels, accused of crimes they could barely understand. The shame nearly destroyed them, but the deadliest twist was still to come. Melissa, sitting in a prison cell, refused to cooperate. She denied everything, twisted every truth into a lie, and whispered threats to anyone who dared cross her. Her obsession with Arav only grew stronger. She sent him letters through her lawyer, filled with cryptic promises and veiled threats. "We're bound together?" One letter read, "If I burn, you burn too." Arav, terrified, considered cutting a deal with the FBI to testify against her, but he knew the risks. Melissa had associates, dangerous men whose names he didn't even know. If he spoke, it wouldn't just be Melissa after him, it would be all of them. And then, just when it seemed the worst had passed, tragedy struck. A fellow student who had been one of Melissa's victims agreed to testify in court. Days before the hearing, that student was found dead in a motel room, an apparent overdose. But the FBI suspected otherwise. Fear rippled through the victims who remained, many of them too scared to come forward. Arav realized then that Melissa's reach extended far beyond the prison walls. She wasn't just a millionaire with dirty money. She was part of a machine that silenced anyone who stood in its way. Arav's life had become a nightmare. He was caught between two impossible choices: betray Melissa and risk death, or stay loyal and face prison for crimes he never wanted to commit. He was trapped in a cage built out of love, lies, and fear, and every move he made only pulled the bars tighter around him. And as the trial loomed closer, the world waited to see who would break first, the manipulative millionaire or the young student she had ensnared. But in the twisted world they had created, survival often demanded a sacrifice, and someone was about to pay the ultimate price. The courtroom became the stage where Melissa's empire finally faced its reckoning. The once celebrated Canadian millionaire sat dressed in prison blues, her hair pulled back, her face a mask of defiance. Every camera in the room was pointed at her. Every whisper in the gallery hung heavy with morbid fascination. Across the room sat Arav, no longer the confident student who had once dreamed of success, but a shadow of himself, thin, pale, and broken under the weight of betrayal and fear. The prosecution laid out the scheme in brutal detail: the fraudulent visa offers, the millions funneled through offshore accounts, the missing students, the victims who had been left with nothing. And then came the affair, the forbidden relationship between a married millionaire and a desperate student. The courtroom gasped as photographs of Arav and Melissa together were projected on the screen, a cruel reminder of how passion had curdled into poison. Melissa never wavered. She denied everything, turning her sharp tongue toward Arav. To the jury, she painted him as the mastermind, claiming she was seduced and manipulated by a young man hungry for money and status. "He used me," she told the court, her voice trembling with manufactured innocence. "I was blinded by his lies." Arav's stomach churned as he listened, realizing that the woman he had once loved would rather destroy him than admit the truth. His lawyer urged him to testify, to reveal everything. But the threats Melissa had whispered in his ear still echoed in his mind. He knew what happened to the student who tried to speak up. He knew Melissa's associates weren't bound by prison walls. Yet, when he looked at the jury, at the eyes of the families who had lost everything, something inside him cracked. He couldn't carry the weight anymore. When Arav finally took the stand, his voice trembled, but his words spilled out like a flood. He told the jury about the gala where they first met, about the affair, about how Melissa pulled him into the scam. He spoke of the promises, the manipulation, the fear that kept him chained. And then, through tears, he admitted his own guilt, how he had recruited other students, how he had lied to his parents, how he had let greed blind him. The courtroom fell silent, the jury leaning forward, as the young man exposed not just Melissa's crimes, but his own shame. For the first time, Arav felt the chains around him loosen, even as he knew the cost would be heavy. Melissa's mask shattered. As Arav spoke, her composure cracked, and her eyes burned with venom. She leaned forward, hissing across the courtroom, "You'll regret this. You're nothing without me." The bailiffs restrained her, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. The jury had seen enough. After weeks of testimony, it took them only hours to deliver their verdict guilty on all major counts. Melissa Carter was sentenced to 25 years in prison, her empire dismantled, her name forever tainted. Richard Carter, her betrayed husband, emerged untouched, his wealth preserved, his reputation carefully shielded by the very evidence he had used to destroy her. To the world, he was the wronged millionaire, but behind the curtain, he had played his part in orchestrating her downfall. For Arav, the outcome was bittersweet. The court recognized him as a victim of Melissa's manipulation, but his involvement in the scam could not be ignored. He was given a reduced sentence, 5 years in federal prison, with the possibility of deportation after release. When the judgment was read, Arav bowed his head, tears streaming down his face. His dream of Canada had ended in chains, his family's sacrifices twisted into tragedy. His parents wept from afar, watching their son's life unravel on television screens, powerless to change the outcome. The young man who once arrived with hope now left with a record that would follow him forever. Melissa, even behind bars, refused to let go. She sent Arav letters filled with rage, obsession, and twisted declarations of love. "We are bound forever." One read, "You may have betrayed me, but you are mine until the end." Arav refused to respond, but he knew the truth. Melissa's shadow would always haunt him. Even in prison, even if she never walked free again, her presence lingered in his mind like a scar he could never erase. Years later, when Arav looked back on his story, he struggled to recognize the person he had once been, the naive student who fell for a promise wrapped in silk and diamonds. He realized that love, when twisted with greed and desperation, could become a weapon sharper than any knife. Melissa had fooled the world for years, but in the end, it was her obsession, her need to control, that destroyed them both. And that is the chilling tale of an Indian student whose affair with a married Canadian millionaire spiraled into a deadly visa scam, leaving lives shattered, reputations ruined, and one haunting reminder: sometimes the cost of chasing dreams is far higher than anyone can bear. If you found this story as shocking as we did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to The Twisted Minds. We bring you the darkest, most twisted true crime stories from around the world. Stories that remind us just how fragile the line between love and destruction can be.